Thread your machine quickly and easily simply by following the numbered guides on the machine and then using the automatic needle threader, which will shoot a loop of thread through the eye of your needle. Fill your bobbins without having to sit with your foot on the foot control simply by unplugging the foot control and pressing the start-stop button on the machine. The machine has a drop-in jam-proof bobbin, so we simply drop the bobbin in, follow our little guides, cut the thread off and replace the bobbin cover. The bobbin cover also features a magnified area so that at all times you can see how much bobbin thread you still have on your machine, and it also doubles up as a magnifying glass for threading specialty needles. Because this machine has the jam-proof bobbin, we don't have to lift our bobbin thread, because when we start stitching, the needle thread will automatically lift it for us. And because it's a jam-proof bobbin, we don't even have to hold on to the threads when we start stitching. The NV1800Q has 232 built-in stitches, which are neatly displayed on the inside cover of the machine. There are 99 utility stitches, which include 10 different style buttonholes, darning stitches, as well as a stitch to sew buttons on with. There are also 133 decorative stitches and 5 different fonts. The decorative stitches can be combined to create unique patterns, and they can also be combined with the fonts too. Because the machine is equipped with a side feed feature, it can sew in 4 different directions. So it can sew forward, backwards, sideways to the left, as well as sideways to the right. Because of the side feed feature, the machine can sew decorative stitches of up to 40 millimeters wide, which means you are no longer limited to narrow decorative stitches. So here is an example of the regular size meandering stitch, which is around 6 millimeters wide, and then an example of the 40 millimeter wide version. Here is a practical example of using the side feed function of the machine. So in this case, I have chosen stitch number 40 from menu number 1 of the decorative stitches, and I've just stitched a straight row of stitches. Now in the next example, you'll see that I've used the side feed function of the machine with that same stitch number 40. So on the LCD screen you'll see there is stitch number 40, so it's going to sew 1 to the right, 1 to the left, 1 to the right, 1 to the left, and so on. So instead of them being in a straight row like there, I've got 1 to the left, 1 to the right, 1 to the left, 1 to the right, and so on. So it creates an almost zigzag pattern instead of just the straight pattern. Stitch selection on the NV1800Q is really nice and easy. You simply look for the icon that represents the menu that you would like to choose a stitch from and touch that. So I have touched the first icon, so I am now on menu number 1 and on stitch number 1. However, if I wanted to change to stitch number 5, I simply touch number 5 and you'll see it changes, and menu number 1, stitch number 5, that is what the stitch will look like. It also tells me which foot I need to have on the machine. It also sets up the ideal settings as far as width and length go, as well as tension. However, if you need to change any of those settings, for example if you wanted a narrower zigzag, then you just touch the minus button and it will make the zigzag narrower. If you want your zigzag to be more spread out, then you adjust the length by touching the plus button. Now if this is a stitch that you're going to do on a regular basis, say for example if you're doing applique and you find your perfect setting, you can save that stitch selection onto the machine's memory. So each time you come back to use that stitch, it will automatically open up your favorite. However, you can also temporarily revert to the regular settings by touching the icon below that. So it's very simple to save your favorites and also to revert back to the standard or suggested settings. To select stitches from the other menus is just as simple. Just touch the button for the icon that represents the stitches that you would like to do. Go to the inside cover of the machine and look for the number. So I am now on menu number 2 and I would like to do buttonhole number 78. So all I do is I touch the 7 and I touch the 8 and then it will set it up for me. So it tells me that I'm on stitch number 78 of menu 2. I need the A foot on the machine and it has set up all the ideal settings for me. If I choose to go to a decorative stitch menu, I just touch the decorative stitch icon. Now there are 3 different menus to choose from within that one menu. So if I want menu number 1 and I would like to do stitch number 55, all I do is I press 55 and it sets it up for me. Then if I would like to add another decorative stitch to that and I wanted stitch number 66, all I do is put in 66. Then if I would like to add some font to that, I go to the font menu and then I look inside my cover and I just type in the numbers of the letters that I want. So if I wanted an A and then a B and a C, I just press those and it sets it up for me. If I would like to go back and add some more decorative stitches, then once again I just type in the number that I would like and it will set it up for me. So I can create a whole combination of different stitches using the decorative menu along with the alphabetical menu too. All of the controls of the machine are at your fingertips. So the first one is your start stop button. Now this machine can sew without the foot control. So for example, if you're doing buttonholes or rows of decorative stitching, instead of putting your foot onto the foot control, you disconnect the foot control and press the start stop button and the machine will stitch. These 2 buttons will create lock stitches at the beginning and end of seams to stop them from coming undone. The first one is your reverse to secure button, and that will cause the machine to sew forwards, backwards and then forwards again at the beginning or at the end of the seam to stop the stitches from coming undone. Then we have the fix button, which is preferred by the quilters because that creates a knot at the beginning and end of the seam so that you don't see unnecessary stitching. This is the needle controller. So if you press that, you can either lower or lift the needle without having to touch the flywheel on the side of the machine. The machine has a pair of built-in scissors, so at the end of the seam, once you're finished stitching, instead of reaching for a pair of scissors, you press that little button and the threads will be cut automatically. Now you can lift or lower the presser foot by simply touching that button while you're sewing. So it's lift or lower, as opposed to lifting or lowering using the lever behind the needle bar. This is the speed control slider, so you can change the speed to sew at a speed that suits you best. To secure your seams at the beginning and end of your sewing, you can choose either the reverse to secure or the fix button, or you could even choose to automate that function by touching that little button on the front panel. Now when you start to sew and when you finish sewing, the machine will automatically either reverse to secure or fix depending on which function you have chosen. To cut the threads at the end of a seam, you can choose either to touch the little scissors on the front of the machine. However, you can also automate that function by touching the little button on the right hand side of the machine. So now the machine will automatically reverse or fix at the beginning and end of a seam, as well as cut the threads at the end of the seam. To lift or lower the presser foot while you are busy sewing, you can choose either to use the button on the front of the machine, or you can automate that function. Now once that function is automated, what will happen is that as the machine stops sewing, it will automatically lift the foot for you. Then once you start sewing again, it will automatically lower the foot for you. Now this is a particularly handy function while you are quilting or sewing larger projects like wedding dresses or evening wear, because it would be ideal in that situation to keep both hands on the fabric while the presser foot lifts. So the minute you stop sewing, the presser foot will lift, and then you can change the direction of the fabric, and then once you start stitching again, the presser foot will be lowered. For free arm sewing, simply remove the accessory tray, and that will reveal a smaller space for free arm sewing for small areas like cuffs and trouser legs. For free motion quilting, darning and sewing on buttons, you need to be able to drop your feed teeth. In order to do that, you just reach around the back of the machine, slide the little lever to the right, and the feed teeth will drop below the needle plate. Now that I'm ready to sew a seam, I have popped my fabric underneath my presser foot, and I have chosen the stitch that I would like to sew. I don't want my seam to come undone, so what I would need to do is either select reverse to secure or the fix stitch, but I can also automate that function. Then when I get to the end of the seam, I need to cut the thread, so I can either use the built-in scissors or I can automate that function too. Now if I needed to change direction while I was busy stitching, I could choose either to lift the presser foot with a button, or I could automate that function as well. So now I've got all of those functions automated, so now I'm ready to start stitching. The other important thing is that this machine has a jam-proof bobbin, so that means I don't have to hold onto my threads when I start stitching. And if I've just placed a new bobbin into the machine, the needle thread will just go down, lift the bobbin thread up and start sewing. So all that I need to do is put my foot on the presser foot and start stitching. So it will stitch forward a few stitches, backwards, and then come forwards because it has reversed to secure. Now when I stop stitching, the foot will automatically lift so that I can then rearrange the fabric and change direction, and the minute I start stitching again, the foot will be lowered. So I stitch, and if I need to change direction, just start stitching again, and when I get to the end of my stitching, I simply push the relevant button, in this case the reverse to secure, and it goes backwards, comes forwards, cuts its threads, lifts its foot by itself, and there I have my beautiful seam, which is secured at the beginning and secured at the end. So all that I have is that one tiny little stitch or little thread to nip off at the beginning of the seam. It also pulls all the threads through to the back where it has finished off and cut, so all the threads are neatly secured at the back of the work. This machine is equipped with what is known as auto tension. So the tension setting of the machine is set to suit the type of thread that you are sewing with, and from there the machine takes over because it will measure the thickness of your fabric and adjust the tension to the fabric that you are stitching with. So to demonstrate that, I've got a double layer of fabric, and I'm going to fold that over so that I now have 4 layers, and I'll fold that over again so that I now have 6 layers. Now I'm going to stitch through the 6 layers and then through the 2 layers, and you'll see that the stitch length, whether it's going through 6 layers or 2 layers, is identical, and that is thanks to the auto tension. So I'll just pop that under the presser foot, lower the foot. I've got all of my settings automated, so the machine's going to automatically reverse to secure at the beginning, and then it's going to stitch through all those layers, and now it's stitching through the 2 layers. When I stop, it will cut the threads. After it's reversed to secure, it will then lift its foot, and I'll just take the work out. So now you'll easily be able to see that where I have stitched through the 6 layers and where I've stitched through the 2 layers, the stitch length is identical irrespective of how many layers it has stitched through, and that is because of the auto tension. Now machines that don't have auto tension would tend to sew tiny little stitches through the thick layers and then bigger stitches through the thinner layers. Now this machine also has a self-leveling button on the foot, which I explain in the training videos, which will help me if I'm stitching through thin layers and I have to climb up onto the thicker layers. So that is a really nice feature, to have that self-leveling button. Let's have a look at how easy it is to sew a perfect buttonhole. So I need to go to the menu that has my buttonholes, and I'm going to choose buttonhole number 80, and the machine sets everything up for me. Now you'll notice that these are not on the default settings. That is because I have my own personal favorite settings that are saved onto the machine. So each time I select that buttonhole, my favorite settings come up. However, if I wanted to change back to the default, I simply just touch that little icon there. But for now, I want to go to my favorite settings, so I just select the stitch and there they are. So now it tells me that I need to have the A foot on the machine. So this is the A foot, the buttonhole foot, and I have popped the button that I would like to stitch onto my garment into the little holder, because the machine is now going to measure that button for me, and it's going to make the buttonhole that exact measurement plus 2 or 3 millimeters extra, just so that the button can get in and out of the buttonhole comfortably. Now I have the buttonhole foot on the machine with the fabric underneath the foot, and I'm ready to stitch my buttonhole. The machine automatically selects the finish stitch or the lock stitch, which means that it will lock the stitches at the beginning and at the end of the buttonhole so that it never comes undone. I'm also going to activate the automatic scissors. The other thing is, I don't like to sit with my foot on the foot control when I have to sew 6 or 7 buttonholes, so I've disconnected the foot control and I simply press the start button. So the machine will knot itself off. It did that at the beginning and it's done it at the end. So all that I have to do is lift the presser foot because it's cut its threads, and there I have a perfect buttonhole. It pulls the threads through to the back and knots them off so that your buttonhole won't come undone, so you can simply clip those threads off. So there is one perfect buttonhole. So if I needed to do 1 or 101, they would all be identical to each other, as long as I kept all the same settings for the buttonhole. Now I'm ready to stitch my button onto my fabric, so I've selected the appropriate stitch. The machine automatically locks the stitches at the beginning and at the end, and I would like to activate the scissors as well. I've also dropped my feed teeth so that the fabric can't move, so all that I need to do now is press my start-stop button. So the machine will count the number of stitches it needs to make to go across to secure that button. It's already finished it off at the end, cut the threads off, so I just lift my presser foot and take that out. So my button has been beautifully stitched on, and all of the threads have been pulled through to the back of the work. So I simply drop a little bit of fray check onto that, clip those threads off, and then that button will never come undone. Now all of the hints and tips regarding stitching buttons onto garments is covered in the training videos that are supplied by Sew and Craft. Now if we take a look at the buttonhole and the button, you'll see that once that buttonhole is cut, this button will slip through that buttonhole quite comfortably because it was measured when the buttonhole was made. The NV1800Q has what is known as a square feed drive system. Now what that simply means is that the feed teeth of the machine, instead of moving in the regular oval or elliptical fashion, what they do instead is they come up, go backwards, drop down, come forwards, and so they continue in that square fashion. The advantage of having a square feed drive system is that the feed teeth then provide a nice strong smooth feed so that you end up with optimum stitch quality on all types of fabric. The feed teeth on the machine also have 7 different directional points. Now what this means is that the machine is able to feed with absolute ease any type of fabric, from the sheerest, flimsiest fabric, as well as stretch laces, etc., all the way through to heavier weight fabrics like denim and even some leather. So here are 2 examples of very flimsy, very sheer fabric, like for example this chiffon. It's stitched a perfectly straight pucker-free seam. Likewise on a piece of georgette, also a perfectly straight pucker-free seam, and I must add that these haven't even been pressed yet, so you can see that they are completely flat and completely pucker-free. If we go to the stretch fabric, you'll see that I can stretch that fabric without the seam going snap, crackle and pop. With lycra, which is renowned for seams that will burst easily, this machine has a stitch that you can use that you can stretch the lycra as hard as you like and it will not go snap, crackle and pop. Here I have a piece of denim, so it's a double folded piece of denim, and you can see it creates a perfectly smooth, beautiful stitch on that. Then if you went through to, for example, this is a piece of faux leather, and this also has created an absolutely beautiful seam, and with the fact that you can manipulate your needle position, you can create rows of evenly spaced stitches without any trouble at all. Now obviously if you're going to be stitching on genuine leather, then you would use the appropriate needle and get the same result as on the faux leather. Create beautiful free motion quilting using the free motion quilting foot that is supplied with the machine. There are also a variety of different quilting feet that also come with the machine, and they are discussed in the step-by-step video lessons. The NV1800Q also features a function called My Custom Stitch. So on menu 1 of the decorative menu, you have a pen that you can use to program on your screen a design that you would have drawn on the graph sheets that are provided with the machine. This is also described in step-by-step detail in the video lessons.